Good morning,
Okay.
all. So I welcome everyone who is part of this webinar who would like to go through the Gramtarang journey. So let me introduce the speaker, Mr. Abhinav Madan. After completion of his BSc from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, New Delhi, he successfully pursued and awarded PGDM degree from Xavier Institute of Management, Bhubaneswar. Mr. Madan worked in different roles like business analyst at GE Capital International Services, Analytics Center of Excellence, and Bangalore, and then become the assistant manager in the same company and further worked as senior analyst, SS Management, GE, TIP Equipment Services, Europe, Amsterdam, Netherlands. After that, he worked as a business planning manager for HP, and with this huge exposure, later on, he co-founded Gramtarang Employability Training Services Private Limited, which we known as GTET. Now, before I go ahead further introducing Mr. Abhinav Madan, the speaker of our day, I would like to say something about Gramtarang. Gramtarang is a social entrepreneurship setup in partnership with National Skill Development Corporation and Centurion University of Technology and Management, focused on outcome-oriented skill development and vocational education of young people, especially from disadvantaged areas and marginalized communities and remote, underdeveloped regions of East and Northeast India. Mr. Madan led this company over 2 rounds of fundraising with NSDC and deployed funds across 41 centers and trained over 4 lakh youth across 12 states of operations, employing over 1,800 people. The model developed by Mr. Madan during his tenure has received awards, citations, recognitions, and accolades at the international stage like UN, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, British Council, and at national level from various government and corporate bodies like Niti Aayog, NSDC, MSME, Ernst & Young, etc. Mr. Madan invited as a skill expert and speaker in various international forums, including a TEDx event organized by the US Consulate, ADB International Skills from Forum in Manila, NUS Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, Pakistan US Alumni Network, Islamabad, and he selected for the prestigious IBLP program organized by the US Department of State to study the US Community College model, and also by the Australian government for an exchange program to understand the challenges of technical vocational education at TAFE Institute in remote areas of New South Wales, Australia. So I would like to welcome one more time to our speaker, Mr. Abhinav Madan, to the participant to the gatherings who would like to learn, would like to experience the journey of Gramtarang, how it started, and now how Mr. Madan turned this as a 100 crore company. So we are just looking forward from Mr. Madan to understand the struggle he has gone through, and I'm sure everyone would be benefited through this. Thank you, sir, and the platform is all yours with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madhusmita. Thank you for the kind introduction. And a very good morning to all of you. I see a fairly, well, we are just about touching 100, so that's a pretty good audience. Apologies for having to cancel at the last minute for the previous weekend that we had set up. As some of you may be aware, life at Centurion University and Gramtarang is pretty hectic. We just have so many things going on, and at the last minute, the Secretary of Government of India calls, so you can't get out of it. In fact, even today, I was pulled out. I was asked by the Vice Chancellor because we are getting a gold medal. Our gold medalist for the India Skills Competition for CNC operator trade is a Gramtarang trainee and Centurion University trainee, and he's getting facilitated by the Chief Minister today in Bhubaneswar. So I was supposed to be with him, but look, we have enough of these facilitations. So I thought it's more important that I get a chance to interact with you. I also have a selfish interest in this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think it's important that we also engage with our student community. It's something which DN sir, Professor DN Rao, our Vice President, keeps reminding me of. And I realized that in my early years, while I did spend at least, I would end up doing at least one session, a workshop a year with our management students. For the last few years, that hasn't happened. So I thank Dr. Madhusmita for this opportunity, for allowing me to connect with you, our students, and to do it in the easiest way for me. The last session I took for our management students in Bhubaneswar was on, I think it was on data analytics. So I had to prepare quite a bit for that. For today's session, I basically just put together slides from my previous 2-3 different forums where I presented, and of course I was helped by one of the key members in my team, Nirod. So you mentioned in the introduction about the TEDx event, and that was a forum where speakers are given about 20 minutes to talk about whatever topic that is dear to their heart, and it's an open forum really. So it was organized by the US Consulate. So that TEDx event, the talk that I gave is there. It's there on YouTube. It has a few hundred views, so you can always go and refer back to that. But I will borrow a lot from there, so there may be some repetition for those of you who've already seen it. But hopefully that's a small number, so most of it will be new. What I chose to focus on in that event was talk about my journey as Dr. Madhusmita kindly introduced, journey from a corporate world, from a glass cubicle doing data analytics and Excel sheets and presentations to rural Odisha. So I thought I'll spend about half an hour going through that today with you, my personal journey and the journey of the company. And it's not only just one company, there are two companies that I'm currently running. So we'll talk a little bit about both. But then I wanted to also make it very relevant for the students. So and startup these days has become a buzzword, right? Everyone's talking about startups. It's the exciting space to be. But I also wanted to maybe demystify that a little bit and contextualize it, help you understand, as a management student myself, even though we had business law and we understood, we studied a lot of these things, when you get into the real world, it's a very different world. So Professor Mukti Mishra, Professor Dina, both were my professors, right? And what we learned in B school was very different from what I learned from them while setting up these companies. So I thought we'll focus on the journey, and then out of that we'll have some lessons for how you can learn from it. That's the most important thing, right? And how it can be relevant for you. So with that background, I'm going to just share my screen. And let me start from the very beginning. So in fact, I don't know if some of you actually attended the recent, there was a live streaming of our event in Delhi. We organized an event with 45 different African countries. And we did literally a road show. We set up an exhibition exhibiting our capabilities as a skills university to ambassadors of African countries. And there, both Professor Mishra and Professor DN were at the event. They were both speaking, and then I followed them after that. And and I joked that's probably the only thing that I can do better than them is make PowerPoint slides. So that's something that you learn as a management graduate, but then you learn even more so when you start in the corporate world. But then when you get into the real world, which is of entrepreneurship, you have to unlearn all of that, because you go from PowerPoint presentations into what the image that you see on the right hand side, which is basically going into the field, right? And so there's a little unlearning that happens. And then as you get into your startup journey and your company scales, you need funds, then you need to go back to it. So definitely PowerPoint skills will always hold you in good stead. So the flow of the day, okay, these are the three logos that are, well, the center of my life. I started my career with GE, but when you create your own brand and your own company, then it's your own baby, right? So it's something we're very proud of. Centurion University has incubated both these companies, Gramtarang and LearnOn. We'll talk about that a little bit. So the second section is what we'll get to right away, which is the Gramtarang journey. And I will borrow from the TEDx talk. We'll talk a little bit about what a startup is, what are the legal structures. I'd given some homework. I don't know if many of you or any of you got a chance to do it. If you did, good. We'll talk a little bit about that. I think in our, in that section of the presentation, and then finally there'll be a little bit of an open house for question and answers. So setting the stage, what is a startup, first of all, right? How do you define a startup? So there are many definitions out there. And one of the definitions I liked, which was again found by Nirodh online, is startup is a venture that is initiated by its founders around an idea or a problem with the potential for significant business opportunity and impact. So there has to be a raison d'etre. Raison d'etre is a French word for reason of existence. Why does this startup exist, right? You have to come together, and very often it has to be founders, right? It's very difficult. Well, there are enough startups which have only single founders, but generally the first, in fact, when you look at the steps of making a startup, one of the steps is find a co-founder, right? It's a very difficult, it's like raising a child. It's very, very difficult. Single parenting is tough. It's hard. It's not impossible. Many people do it and they do it well, but it is really hard. So founders bound together by a common vision, mission, and a dream to change things in the world, right? You identify the problem and you build a plan and a business around it, of how you can or build products and services around that idea, how you can solve that problem, and therefore make a little dent in the world, change the world, right? That's what this whole thing is about, and that's what excited me. The idea of that, doing it on your own, to leave the corporate job and come into a startup. However, there's also a warning at the beginning itself, right? In the corporate world, when you're there, you're very often you're just running around in circles, right? You're a cog in the wheel, and you're doing what your boss tells you. So it feels repetitive. Sometimes it feels boring, and you feel you want out of that. And then you get into a startup excitedly, but then the startup journey is not so easy. And I think this cartoon or this picture captures it really well. It's a hard journey. It's a tough journey, but I think if you enjoy the view on the side and all the other things around it, it can be thoroughly enjoyable. So let's get into like I was telling you, the TEDx talk, right? So I titled the talk, Inverting the Pyramid Without Selling Your Ferrari. So what does that mean? Inverting the pyramid. So Dr. C.K. Prahlad has talked a lot about the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, right? If you look at the social structure in India, we have a very, very large demographic of people who are living at or below the poverty line, right? And these are mostly rural areas, people are living in remote areas, and where modern development hasn't really reached them, nor has education reached them, nor healthcare has reached them. Now, I was living in a very different world. I was born and brought up in cities. I've never really traveled to a village. I was born in Bombay, studied in Bangalore, moved to Delhi. So always been in cities. So मैंने कभी गाँव देखा नहीं था properly. I'm from Punjab, but our ancestral village was at time of partition. It was left behind in Pakistan. So everyone had to move. My forefathers had to move and resettle in Delhi. So the concept of a village itself was alien to me. I didn't understand it. We are city boys, city girls. And I'm sure many of you are. Many of you aren't as well, but some of you could relate with that. So when I got that first exposure to rural Orissa was when I was convinced that this is where I would really like to work, because the world I was living in the corporate world, was very, very different. And the real India that I saw when I traveled to Parla community was very, very different, right? So for me, the interesting thing was, can we build a company which can also be profitable, scalable, sustainable, profitable company, which can work at solving some of these problems at the bottom of the pyramid. So I don't have to, not that I have a Ferrari, I had a Fiat Palio. So that was my first car. Without having to sell that, could I do it? Now, obviously that title is taken out of the famous book by this writer, Robin Sharma, who talks about the monk who sold his Ferrari. So that was the idea behind it, behind the title. The power of choice. I think that's something that that many of us don't have. All of us who have chosen to do an MBA or chosen to do a graduation with Centurion University or a postgrad have been supported because our parents have enabled that choice. But the reality of India, and I'll talk through this little video. Those of you who are in Parlakamundi campus would be familiar with it, right? So my first journey to any rural area was actually Parlakamundi, right? And we traveled into the villages around Parlakamundi, and I got to see this reality away from the television screen and news and media for the first time with my eyes.
काका घरी केते जमी अच्छे काका तुम केते एकड़ न 7 एकड़ काका घरी काम करावा लगी होय ताको दिटा धान कटा होची तो सेति लगी
So we talked about the power of choice, right? So what did the choice Bhanupriya have? Bhanupriya is a girl. She's a tribal girl. We followed her journey from her village where we mobilized her. She was from Kuchinda. So she's not from Palakamudi actually. She's from Kyonjar, near that area. There's a block, a tribal block called Kuchinda. We mobilized many people from there for Gramtarang courses. And what choice did she have, right? She was brought up, went through some education up to class 8 maybe. And the only income making opportunity for her was harvesting the field during harvest season. And at that time, 60 rupees, right now maybe it may be 100 rupees, 120 rupees. Some more options have come up with NREGA. So maybe you can get 100 days of work as well. But the choices for youth like Bhanupriya are very, very limited. This is apart from the economic choices or opportunities available in that area. Let's add another layer of society, right? Socially, women will not be allowed to travel very far away from their home. So how do we make or how do we build an ecosystem for people like Bhanupriya to break out of this and give her more opportunities and more choices to do something with her life, right? That was something which was very powerful. That was really the main thing which motivated me to get out of my glass cubicle and move to rural Orissa. Of course, the photo here is of the beautiful highway between Konark and Puri. So it's a photo I took while I was driving. So it's not really rural Orissa, but yeah, it's a photo which I actually took. So having looked at the problems of rural Orissa or rural India for that matter, I was driven and motivated, and of course, very inspirational co-founders, Professor DN and Professor Mukti. Professor DN comes from a development sector background. So many of you may not know that he studied at IIM Calcutta, which is obviously the top B school in India, top 2, top 3. And he would have had the world of opportunities, right? He would have had at that time 40-50 lakh salary jobs available for him without any problem. He chose to become a young professional in a district in Odisha. And why was that? Because similarly, well, of course, for me, the awakening came 7-8 years into my corporate life. For him, it came at a very, very early stage. He was determined to do something like this much, much earlier. And he traveled around rural Odisha for the first 10-15 years of his work life, just doing development sector work, initially with the district collectors and district administration, and then with Gram Vikas and NGO, and finally he came to XIMB. Professor DN met Professor Mukti Mishra, Dr. Mukti Mishra at XIMB. So Professor Mishra also had a illustrious career. He went to Australia, did his PhD there, MBA and PhD, taught in many countries. He already had a public sector job in sales with HPCL, but he chose to come back to Orissa again to do something for the youth of Orissa. So they were bound by a mission to do something in the education space for the youth of Orissa. I met them in 2008 again after my MBA. I had done my MBA in XIMB, worked in the corporate world. I did worked in the field of analytics with GE, and then got my next big break, went to the Netherlands. That's where the bug bit me, right? When I was in Amsterdam, earning a really good salary, very comfortable life, no issues whatsoever that I could complain of. That's when disillusionment came in, and I quickly figured out that this cannot be the meaning of life. Just having a nice job and a nice house and a nice car, and that cannot be the end of life, right? That cannot be the meaning of life. And when I looked more and more into how the situation our country is in, I was very, very clear that I would like to come back and do something in India for India. And that's when I started engaging with both Professor Mishra and Professor D.N. Rao of how we could build an organization or build a company which could solve this problem of unemployment and limited opportunities for the youth in rural India. Right? That's really how the idea of Gramtarang started. But obviously, when you are building, starting a new company, right? You're writing a business plan. You need to first size the market and size the opportunity, right? That's the typical venture capital speak of market sizing, opportunity sizing. So you need to understand what is it that that you're going after and how big is this opportunity. And then in this large market space, how can you make money out of it? Because if you're setting up a company, obviously it needs to make money to pay the bills, right? So you have to figure out what the business plan and the business model is going to be. So the first thing that we did was we tried to understand how does the education system look like in India? And some of these numbers were a real eye opener for me. I have updated these numbers because obviously my first presentation was 15 years ago. So I've updated it maybe a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, probably needs to be further updated. But as per World Bank and then the NSSO survey, the statistical survey done by Government of India, our literacy rate is 74%, right? Which has grown well over the last 10 years. Now, 74% sounds good on paper. 93% is our gross enrollment ratio. What do you mean by gross enrollment ratio? If 100 people are born in a particular district, how many of these 100 newborn babies, when they are age 4 or age 5, will they actually get admission into school, right? So primary education actually starts from 6 for class 1. So how many of these 100 kids who are born will actually get admitted in class 1? That's the gross enrollment ratio. So if out of 100, 93 students or 93 children will get admitted on paper as per the statistical survey in India, right? Which is again gone up massively because a lot of initiatives have gone in, for example, midday meal schemes and other schemes, right? So there's been a lot of initiative by Government of India to improve that. However, 52% is the gross enrollment ratio for secondary education. When we say secondary education, how many students are actually making it past primary school into the senior school, and how many will actually graduate into 10th and above, and then how many will graduate into universities. And the gross enrollment ratio in higher education is 20%. All of these numbers have shown some increase, 8, 9, 10%, which is good. There is progress. ऐसा नहीं है कि काम नहीं हो रहा है. There is some progress being made by the government. However, if you were to look at it slightly differently, right? Now, we talked about class 1, class 5, class 10. These are the academic hurdles in a way you can call. You have to, from class 5, you graduate to class 6 and so on. Class 10 is the big academic hurdle. So how do we fare at the key academic hurdles? Let's go back to the same number, right? 93% is the gross enrollment ratio in primary schools in India, right? Our population increase, net population increase after taking into account the death rate and infant mortality rate, our net population increase is about 15 million or 1.5 crore in India per year. That means every year 1.5 crore babies are born in India and who successfully clear 6 months and are healthy, right, and grow. Out of them, 93% will get admission into primary school, into class 1. That is about 1.4 crores or 14 million. However, 57% of them actually don't attend school and 50% of them drop out. So you have a massive dropout rate. 7 million or 70 lakh youth out of these 1.54 crores will not go beyond class 5. At class 10, there is another 49% failure rate. So जो 70 लाख पास हुए, जो क्लास 5 से आगे बढ़े, उनमें से भी आधे लोग at class 10 will drop out. At class 12, there's another 50% failure rate. And at degree level, the failure rate is even higher because many college dropouts, kids do not complete their degree education. So if you sum it up, out of the 1.5 crore or 15 million people who are born in India every year, 14.18 million are actually dropouts, or in a way you can call them rejected by the HR. If you call this a system or a process, the HRD system, 14.18 of them are rejects of the system. And they are ending up, where are they ending up? In the agriculture sector, partial employment, like Bhanupriya earning 60 rupees a day during harvest season, or maybe now it's 100 rupees, or NREGA, or getting into small scale industries, becoming a vegetable vendor, starting a small pan shop, starting a small shop in their village, or moving to the cities, working as a driver, electrician, plumber, construction, unskilled labor, semi-skilled labor. So that's where most of these, the informal sector is broadly where they end up. Only 0.82 million actually make it into the organized sector. So like you and like me, like all of us who are here sitting in front of our computer or a phone and with Zoom connections and internet, on a percentage basis, right? From the 15 million people who were born in the same year that you were born, you are only one of the 0.82 who will eventually end up in the organized sector. And that for me was a real eye-opener. If you go a little bit deeper, right? Let's go a little bit deeper into these numbers. What is the reason for these dropouts, right? First of all, what is the overall enrollment rate in vocational education in India, right? Vocational education is ideally where the dropout, school dropout or a college dropout should go, right? Only 5% of the youth of India will opt for vocational education. Whereas if you look at the number in other countries like China, it's 50%. In South Korea, it's 96%. In Germany, it's 70%. On an average in developed countries, it will be upwards of 50%. And we are way, way, way behind. What is the formal vocational education system in India? Typically ITIs. Nobody wants to go to an ITI. It is somehow perceived as labor and therefore not interested. And that's fundamentally the problem that we have. While we have to fix the education system, we also need to create that alternative vocational education system. And if you compare India with China, China has 500,000 vocational schools, and India, which is now in population terms very close to China and will overtake China soon, has 30,000. And that's basically the fundamental problem. So when I was talking about the understanding the market opportunity, it became very evident. You do a little bit of secondary research and you will see how fundamentally flawed our Indian education system is. Our obsession is to have higher education. From the time that we are born, the only thing our parents think of is बच्चे को degree कराना है, कुछ भी करके. Degree कराने के बाद job है, वो भी नहीं. So there is another problem, which is unemployability of graduates and postgraduates. I'm not even getting to that. I'm talking about those people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, the 14.18 million people every year who are formally rejected, are dropouts of the HRD system. Where do they go? And what is the ecosystem that we can create for them? And does not the government or universities like us do we not have a responsibility to do something for them? And what really got me excited about working with Professor Mishra and Professor Dian was they were very clear. Professor Dian was very clear in his mind. If my institute is in Parlakamundi, how many students from Gajpati district are getting benefited from that institution? So if you do a study, how many students actually clear +2 science in Gajpati? How many students are graduating from Gajpati doing an MBA in any of our campuses? It's a very small number. Naturally, we started an ITI and we started these various programs for vocational education where you can take the youth who either they cannot afford education or they cannot afford to spend 3 years in education, they need to start earning quickly. And vocational education becomes very naturally the right kind of offering for them, right? So that was the thinking behind, building our solution. So how do we go about building it, right? In ADB terminology or World Bank terminology, it's called the Quadruple Helix Model. Anyway, that's a fancy name. What does it mean really? To make this model successful, we cannot entirely depend only on ourselves as a company, right? Because if you have to offer a course to somebody who cannot afford it, funds have to come from somewhere, right? So it needs it's a complex problem which can be solved only if you bring all the 4 stakeholders close together. The first is the government which creates policies, standards, brings in schemes and funds the education, sponsors education for the poor. But more than that, it also gives you credibility and outreach. How do you reach out to rural India and mobilize students for your courses? If you're a government approved training provider, then people will feel comfortable that yes, we can send our children there because this is a government accredited training provider. The second is academia. Academia is important because India is still obsessed about जो भी कहोगे हमको वो degree and qualification का obsession है, and the obsession is it goes so deep that literally even your marriageability, that is the chances that you'll get married, are linked with your highest qualification, right? So whether you like it or not, everyone will ultimately want some educational qualification, even though it may not give you a job, right? Very often our ITI students will get much better job opportunities than any other person, right? There are so many colleges around here which don't have any campus placement whatsoever in Odisha, and our ITI students do much better than them. They can choose whether they want to go to Pune, Coimbatore, Chennai, Tirupur, or wherever. But still there is a certain stigma associated with it, and there is an obsession for degrees. So whether we like it or not, that university linkage for certifications and qualifications is important. But where does Gramtarang come in? It's a social entrepreneurship. Now, the definition of social entrepreneurship also is interesting. In fact, we probably need a separate session for that. But it's basically trying to solve a problem for the society, right? Which is which in an entrepreneurial way, that is in a sustainable way. We're not doing grant-based work, or we are not doing something absolutely free of cost. We are trying to find a business model in solving that problem, right? And how do we do it? We do it by bringing industry, academia, and government together. So we call it a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 model. 1/3 of the funding comes from industry, 1/3 comes from government, 1/3 comes from academia. And that's how, when I say academia, because the student themselves will pay for it. There are fee-based courses. And that's how we made the Gramtarang model sustainable, right? And of course, without the industry, nothing can happen. Job nahi hai, to fir koi fayda nahi hai. So we were very clear that if you're going to design any courses, they have to be linked with the industry. They must result in a job, in a placement. And the only way you can do that is by involving the industry from day one. Don't wait for the end of the course. It's not like an MBA program where you can just call for campus placements and industry will come. Let's work from day one on what are the requirements in the industry, work backwards, and skill people in those areas where the industry will recruit. But there's a double problem there. Industry will recruit in many sectors. Like, for example, there's a huge demand for welders. Right now, between Parla Community Center, which is being run by Sadat Ali Asinbari, and our centers here run by Ajay and team, we are not able to produce the welders for which there is a demand in the industry. Because why? The job is not aspirational. So not only do we have to find the right, find job opportunities in the industry, we need to also find the jobs which are aspirational for the youth. And then we need to work on both. We need to work on counseling the youth, and then we need to figure out how we handhold them from where they are into these jobs, where the jobs are, because the jobs are not in Odisha. The jobs are all in the industrial cluster, so which means migration. So the problem is fairly complex. How do we design our courses, right? So when we went about designing a solution for our courses, this is the core philosophy of Centurion University, and this is something that Professor Mishra wants every faculty, staff, and student of ours to internalize. So I've chosen to keep this slide specifically in the presentation today because I just want this to go into each of our minds, right? This is the fundamental philosophy at Centurion University and at Gramtarang. Traditional learning happens in the classroom. Applied learning happens in a lab. Action learning is in a live industry environment where you will learn real-world hands-on skills. And unless you have all three types of learning, the learning will never be complete. आप theory में रह जाओगे, कभी practice नहीं कर पाओगे, और कभी actually कुछ live production में काम नहीं कर पाओगे. So to get to that stage, you need to go through all three, and the action learning is what really is our differentiator. If you look at our various units that we have, whether it is Gramtarang and other companies, we have Gramtarang Foods, Gramtarang Technologies, GTET, we have a new company, EdTech startup. So we have a whole range of companies that we've created. Plus, at our Center for Innovators and Entrepreneurship run by Sanjeev Mishra and the team, of course, Centurion has a large team supporting him, including Dr.Madhusmita. We have incubated 40 startups, right? So we've created this ecosystem where people can come and take an idea or a concept and convert it into a product or a prototype and maybe build a business around it. For example, we have a full-fledged company which is doing about 60 lakh turnover in training and similar turnover in manufacturing called Skyrider, which is entirely done by our own students, our alumni, right? So that's been incubated here. So these are the kind of initiatives. We have a transformer manufacturing unit. We have apparel manufacturing units. We have woodwork manufacturing, right? So we are doing various production, which gives an opportunity for students to learn hands-on also, right? Now, for MBA students, where is the opportunity? I think there's tremendous opportunity, right? It is up to you to come and take advantage of these businesses that exist on campus. Partho, for example, is the Chief Operating Officer of Gramtarang. He's in charge of all of these production units. Let's take a very simple thing like pricing, right? Pricing of a product requires a whole lot of market analysis and bottoms-up costing. So you can learn pricing in theory in your classroom, but you can come and sit down with Partho and help him figure out how to price, for example, the wood cabinets to supply to apartments that are coming up, new apartment complexes, or how to price a shirt for selling in the market, right? How should we position it? How should we market it? There is tremendous opportunity to work with our own production units and apply all the theory that we are learning in our B school in reality in these units, right? All of these various units that we have. Same for engineers, right? Same for all other domains. So we try to have that action learning component wherever in as many campuses as possible, right? Obviously, it cannot be replicated in every campus, but Vijayanagaram campus also, we are making, DNSA is making a lot of effort to replicate the Bhubaneswar model both in Palakamandi and Vijayanagaram. So how are we going about doing this industry integration, right? So we've first of all chosen to focus on 5 industry sectors, and we've chosen industry partners for those sectors. Unless you have technical expertise, you will never have the right curriculum and you won't know which job role to train in. So these are our various industry partners who we work with to set up labs. So we have a Volvo Eicher lab in Palakamandi, we have an Ashok Leyland lab here in Bhubaneswar and a Yamaha lab here. And these labs during summer are sitting idle. In fact, right now also sitting idle. So even if you're on a distant campus and you want to come here and spend 2 weeks or 4 weeks to have an immersive learning here, we're absolutely open to that. In fact, that's what Skyrider does. Skyrider, by the way, brings students from as far as Punjab and Tamil Nadu and Hyderabad to our Bhubaneswar campus just to learn hands-on skills in these CNC labs and automotive labs. So there's no reason why students from other campuses cannot come here. In the hospitality sector, we are working with Burger King, now with KFC and Cafe Coffee Day, and then healthcare as well. So these are the sectors we've chosen to focus on. And some of the advanced areas that we are doing skilling in: 3D design, VR, gaming, diagnostics with Bosch. This is a course that we have right here in our Bhubaneswar campus. We're doing AWS analytics, MLAI, and again in healthcare sector. So we have come up with these various programs which are exciting not only for bottom of the pyramid. So see, this is our strategy was like this. Gramtarang does skilling for the bottom of the pyramid, but when it develops a lab or a workshop to impart the hands-on skills, obviously that lab and workshop can also be used for advanced skills for graduates, undergraduate students, postgraduate students, for engineers, for diploma engineers, for paramedic school students, right? So the labs are created for anyone who is willing to learn, right? That's the concept. And that's how you build sustainability in the model as well, and not focus only on one thing. I was talking about the CIE. So Gramtarang is registered under Startup Odisha, as an incubator, and it works closely with the Centurion University team. So these are the initial companies that have successfully scaled, right? Each of these are companies which have, at some time ago, they were in an idea stage and now have reached some level of scale where they are making at least 1-2 crores of turnover. Some of them are much larger. For example, GTET is a 50 crore company right now. GTVET also on its own right is a 50 crore company. We have Gramtarang Inclusive Development Services run by Venkat. He is also an alumnus from my college, XIM. He's also scaled up successfully. So these are existing companies which are already operational and scaled, right? So these are success stories for our startup ecosystem. All of these companies offer internship opportunities for our students. In fact, we've just taken a few interns both in GTVET, the last company, and in GTET. Partho's taken a couple of interns as well in the assessment center, and they create these opportunities for our students as well for internship. This is the startup space that we've created. It's a co-working space in our Bhubaneswar campus, right? So students are free. If you have an idea and you want to come up with maybe start a business around it and not sit for placements, we will offer this space to you and give you the support and handholding that you need to create your own startup, right? Under Startup Odisha, and try to extend all the Startup Odisha benefits to you as well. product design is a key element before you start any company, right? So you need to come up with some design, and we have all the software available here. Our Dassault lab has 3D design software for designing anything from medicines and molecular, designs for biotechnology to designing a factory, to designing automotive vehicles, to doing VR, AR stuff. So there's a whole host of things that can be done here. For example, our entire EV our EV unit that we're currently running, and all these vehicles that are made, they're designed there, they're tested in a 3D model, in a 3D platform, and then we go out and actually build the prototype and take it to the market. For example, we've delivered 40 e-rickshaws to HomeFed. We recently got a massive order in Vizianagaram for 500 vehicles for Tata Technology. Apparel is another sector where we've successfully scaled up and set up this apparel factory. So we made 5 lakh masks during lockdown. Now, all of these machines are available on campus. So if any of you, and I know a couple of people who have done that, have a thought of an idea that I would like to build this product, we will be more than happy to have you come. We'll dedicate some space for you, and you can start using it to build your products and take it to the market. Build your own website also and take it to the market, right? We've done that successfully ourselves. We have the people, we have the technology, we have the infrastructure, machines, and we'll be more than happy to handhold you to do it. Auto component supply to HAL, right? That's aero engine components. In fact, we're registered with MiG and Sukhoi. So we have a full team. Subrat, who heads that unit. In fact, I was telling you about our gold medalists. So today they are receiving the gold medal from the Chief Minister. But all of these machines are really, really high-end machines. In fact, the machine in the top left-hand corner is a 1.5 crore machine, which is one of its kind in India. You can machine components which you can't do anywhere else. So you have this infrastructure on campus. It's again an opportunity, right, to offer machining solutions to the industry in general. These are the various orders that we've executed. Transformers. Now, transformers are everywhere. Repair of transformers is how we started. So this unit, in fact, there's an interesting story we had about Dr. Jagannath Padi, Professor Jagannath Padi, who is the director of the Bhubaneswar campus. He's an electrical engineer, and he felt that he went through engineering at REC without ever having seen how a transformer looks like from the inside. So we bought a second-hand transformer, opened it up just to show it to the students, explain it to the students. Then we decided to start repairing it, right? Because when you repair and fix the transformer is when you actually learn how it works. So you went from applied learning to action learning by repairing the transformer. Then we got a small order for repairing. Slowly the orders grew, and now we do about 5 to 6 crore turnover every year. We make at least 1,000 transformers a year. We have a full-fledged setup for manufacturing of transformers. And this is also offered as a 24 credit domain for students. Wood engineering. This is all the woodwork that Partho does, and we supply this furniture to our own campuses, to guest houses, to apartment complexes. This is the Yamaha lab, paramedics lab, concrete tables, units. I'm just going through it very quickly. Some of this you may already be familiar with, but see, all of it comes together how? Agriculture is a huge entrepreneurial opportunity. We don't realize that. We think agriculture is just, is something where you have to go into the fields and work with your hands. The kind of opportunities that exist in the agri sector are really untapped. In fact, a lot of IITians I know are coming back from big jobs, fancy jobs in Bangalore, coming back to their villages and starting their own farms or working with existing farmers to make products, local products, market it, package it well, and sell it to the local market. One of my seniors from XIMB, I don't know, those of you in Odisha may be familiar with a brand called Milk Mantra, Milky Moo. Milky Moo is a very nicely packaged milk product, range of milk products from milk, curd, ghee also. They even make chhena podo. Very nicely packaged and branded. That's the journey he undertook. He just decided one day to quit his corporate job. He was a senior of mine, earning a really good salary in the UK, came back to Odisha, set up a small factory in Puri, and slowly raised money, and now it beats HomeFed in most of the retail outlets. It's a fantastic brand. So all of these opportunities exist around us, right? It's up to us to figure out how we can make the most of it. So to kind of summarize how the journey has been and where it has kind of brought us today, where we stand today. 2005 to 9 was when JITM was started as a university. I joined in 2008, so I was part of that initial journey. Many of the people in our core team in Centurion and Gramtarang are, from that time as well. So I still have many of the people from the original founding member team who are still with us today. That was really what we call the genesis, right? 2010 to 15 was when we became a university and we started getting the recognition. We got NSDC funding to set up our centers. So funding is a key component for the success of any startup. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the coming slides. And for us, the funding came from NSDC, right? So we had 2 rounds of funding from them. It's a government body which gives loans, soft loans. And we use that money to set up all our centers. And then we slowly started getting the awards and accolades. But the awards and accolades did not come because of a nice campus or because of the money that we raised. It came because we were able to bring in industry partnerships. And why did the industry partnerships come in? Because we were able to train and provide them skilled youth, which is what the industry wanted. So we identified that opportunity, both from a youth perspective, the lack of jobs for youth like Bhanupriya, and from an industry perspective of where the demand is in the industry, and figuring out how we can take these youths who are looking for work and who are willing to migrate, and then build our product and service around it. Just taking a youth like Bhanupriya from Orissa, remote from Kuchinda to Tirupur, it's not going to happen on its own. It requires a whole lot of hard work of counseling, talking to the parents, convincing them, building a safety net for them, a safe ecosystem for them, handholding the migration, having an office in Tirupur, having an office close to them in Kuchinda where they can go in case there's some problem at home, right? So you have to solve, when you're working with people, you have to solve for all of these. And that's how it becomes successful. It doesn't happen just by having a nice center or, having an industry tie-up. 2015 to 17, we were really recognized. We became a skills university, a Centurion. We were awarded, or we became the first of excellence in 2018. Got an awarding body status, which is for first unit, which depends on people, right? Coming and sitting in a restaurant or living in a hotel for you to earn money. Skill development centers can only continue to function and earn money if you are doing skilling. And if it's a lockdown and there's nobody in your centers, then obviously everything is idling and then there's no cash flow. So 2020 lockdown affected us as badly as the hospitality sector. We were not able to mobilize any students, no training was ongoing, government didn't have money to pay us. So we had a really, really difficult time. And that's when came our new startup idea, because you cannot give up and say, hey, everything is lost, right? You need to, and obviously with the kind of people that we have, the team that we built up. So I had a couple of batchmates of mine who joined us, and they were also co-founders and directors at Gramtarang. We kind of brainstormed and re-engineered our, what we call the pivot, right? We pivoted into a new startup. And I'll talk a little bit about that. How do we say that we are successful? When it who talks about our model, which is different from regular universities or regular training companies. We talked about the various received over the years. Though that we were doing the right, we got a number of awards, whether from NSDC or FICCI, and the most pleasing award is this one. So it's when your student goes on to become very successful, is when you feel that yes, you're doing something right and you're working in the right direction. So we call it the world of hopes and possibilities, and that's really I think that video. I wanted to end that section of the presentation with that video. It closed the loop, right? So the girl started her journey from Cochinda. It ends up in Bangalore, and you saw our team, which is actually present in Bangalore, visits them in the hostels, does life skills classes in the evening, talks to them, helps them get comfortable with this new life, right? Because while they are now earning members of the family and they do have a choice, they have executed their choice of starting to work and on. However, it's not so easy, right? You're suddenly going from freedom in a village to being in 8 or 10 hour shifts, right? Where there's a lot of tough targets. They expect if you're on the shop floor, the supervisor will expect you to deliver. You can't make mistakes. So there is those pressures and stresses that they have to deal with, right? And they're young women, right? So there's a lot of other aspects that we need to also cover. So there's all these other issues that we need to work with and work around to make this model successful. And it doesn't happen just by, like I said earlier, just by having one. You can't train this youth like Bhanupriya and say, okay, ab tum Bangalore chale jao, wahan pe job hai, and that's it. It doesn't end there. So you have to manage that whole process. And fundamentally, what Gandhiji said, right? Be the change that you want to see. And so if you see some problem out there and a problem that needs to be solved and the change that needs to be made, start from yourself. Be the change that you want to see in the world around you, and do it in a profitable way to make your entrepreneurship successful. So there was, like I told you, an extended version of my TEDx talk, right? Obviously, I brought in a lot more stories into that part of the presentation. I'll now get into some of the startup definitions, right? So how is it relevant for you, and how can you use benefit from our learnings of what we've done as a group, and how can we shorten your path and make it easier for you to do your own startup, right? If you choose to, and if you want to, let's say, drop out of placements and start your own company. So we'll come back to a startup definition. So there was a nice philosophical definition I started with, but here's the legal definition. If it is incorporated as a private limited company, right, or a limited liability partnership, up to 7 years from its date of incorporation, that's the definition of a startup. However, in the case of biotechnology, it can go up to 10 years as long as the turnover doesn't exceed 25 crores, and if it is working towards innovation, development, and so on. So this is the technical or legal definition of a startup as per Government of India. If you fall under this criteria, then you stand to benefit, or you can take some benefits of the various schemes available for startups, right? Now, why is it important for us to know this or understand this? Because this is where theoretical education in a B school ends and real world education begins, right? So to give you an example, I moved back to Odisha. We were doing a skill course in Centurion University. We set up the company. We didn't have any money. So I went to the bank. I went to the bank saying, hey, there's a new company that we've incorporated. Look at my CV. It's very strong. My chairman is Professor Mishra. Look at his CV. Professor D.N. Rao is the third person. 3 of us have created this company. Give us a 10 lakh loan. We want to start doing some business. So he looked at me and he laughed. He's like, what's your collateral? I'm like, what do you mean collateral? Look at us. We already have a nice setup in Centurion, and we're going to start doing training. Just give us a small loan to start with. He laughed. He's like, you get a collateral. That means you need to put some property there, or you have the personal guarantee of somebody with that kind of net worth. Then only I can give you that loan. So that was my wake up call, or a reality check of how supportive the real world is for startups, right? So I came with all these lovely aspirations, quitting a nice corporate job, earning a really good salary, coming back to India, wanting to do something here. And here's the reality check of the branch manager of OBC branch, Shahid Nagar, rejecting my 10 lakh rupee loan proposal, right? And that also with the backing of the kind of people I already had. Had I started on my own, I would have not been able to do anything at all, right? So how do you overcome these hurdles, and how do we create a ecosystem that will enable you to not face the same problems that we did? So first of all, I'll go through certain steps of how to start a startup. I really like this slide because this is, in fact, Sanjeev has printed this up and put it in our co-working space as well. It really captures the journey really nicely, right? First step is live in the future. So you have to be ahead of your time, because if you're starting something new, it's a new product or a service that doesn't already exist, or maybe it exists, but there are some problems with it which are not being done well by the existing companies or existing providers who are offering it. So live in the future, think ahead of your time, and figure out what is missing. Write it down and bounce your ideas around. Talk to people, right? That's the only way you're going to get your feedback on your idea, because we get so many ideas every day, but not all of them will necessarily be successful. Make a prototype, right? And the prototype obviously is not always a product, it's also of a service. So it could be a simple thing like a delivery service, right? You can do a prototype and start it on a small scale in the campus itself, right? I'll give you an example. I'm now staying in the Bhubaneswar campus, Jatni. I'm staying in Hostel 1, right? Hostel 1 is at least about a kilometer from the main gate, right? Now, I don't have a vehicle with me. I don't have a cycle with me. There are some electric vehicles I can see around me, but I don't have access to them. The driver is not there. I've ordered something on Swiggy or Zomato. Swiggy, Zomato is not allowed to come inside. They leave it at the gate, right? Is there an opportunity for me to create a small service, right, by employing one guy or two people who will do that last mile distribution, pick up something from the gate, break into the hostel, because I don't want to go all the way to pick up. Can it be converted into a full business or not? It could be, it could not be. Maybe people will rubbish it. But how do you test it, right? You test it by making a prototype and seeing how many people will actually pay you for that service. So people who want that service, then obviously that idea is not scalable. But if suddenly a lot of the students say that, hey, yes, that is indeed a problem, and let's say we hire one electric vehicle, we rent it out from the university or from Gramtarang, and just one guy who just comes and does this delivery service, last mile delivery service, right? And it will pay his salary, and people are willing to pay 5 rupees for that extra for that, right? To save them the trouble. Then it can actually become a business opportunity. So, but how do you test it? You make a prototype, you offer it, and see if it will work, right? Show it to a small group of people, and then iterate on it and see, okay, can it be refined, changed, and how scalable is it? So this idea is great is maybe a good idea for our campus, but can this be taken outside anywhere? Not really, right? Because otherwise Zomato, Swiggy always goes to your doorstep. It's only in university campuses that sometimes they're not allowed to come inside. But can it be replicated in other university campuses? Maybe, right? So that's where you need to iterate on the prototype and figure out whether it makes sense or not. Then if you think that, yes, indeed, this idea can be scaled up into a full-fledged business, that's when I talked about it earlier, you need to find a co-founder, right? Because the startup journey is lonely, it's tough, and having somebody who shares that mission vision with you, if you do it right at an early stage, in fact, when you're on campus, invariably it's friends sitting down, having a chat while you're having a meal or while you're sitting and having a party, enjoying yourself. That's where the ideas come from, right? So very often you start with co-founders itself. But once you formalize it, then you need to start bringing in formal structures. So you need to register your company. That's when it's important to get the structure, legal structuring right, and get your equity structure right. Because if you have a co-founder, how much effort is that person going to put in? How much time that person is going to put in? How much time you're going to put in? Because initially, the only effort that you're putting in, it's your sweat. It's your sweat and blood that you're putting into that idea, right? So in a way, it's called sweat equity. The equity that you're sharing at that time, suppose you're putting in money into a company, you're putting in 1 lakh, you put in 50,000, your friend puts in 50,000. Ideally, if you both put in 50,000 each, it should be 50% each stake in the company. So they should get half of the shares, you should get half of the shares. But you should not make that mistake. That can be a big mistake. You have to understand it's not only the money, it's how much effort that person is willing to put in, and will that person last with you throughout the journey or not. So you have to be very careful about how you structure it at that early stage. Many people go into that, chalo, sab mil baat ke karenge. And then one person doesn't enjoy it so much and starts backing out and is doing something else, whereas you continue putting in as much effort and you are successfully scaling the business, and then that person still has 50% stake in it, right? and you're putting in all of the effort. And what has he done? He's only put in 50,000 rupees. By the time your company is already earning 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs, that 50,000 rupees is not so important anymore. So getting your structure right at that early stage is very important, right? And you have to think it through, not do it in, in a rush and just go with the flow. Get some advice, think it through, debate it with a couple of senior people, get a mentor, and ideally get a right, build a right board. If you have a board structure to support you with this, that would be the best way to do it. Look for funding, right? So when you find a co-founder, you should try to see उसमें क्या strength, उसके strengths क्या है, मेरे strengths क्या है, right? So to give you my example, my strengths were execution. My chairman's strengths, obviously he's a out and out, he can go raise money, he builds networks with the government, he can go he can do anything, frankly, right? But however, when it comes to building things on the ground, he relied on me. So it came together very well, right? In the new company that I set up, my co-founder, unfortunately, who passed away in COVID, Aditya Saikya, he had the networking to be able to raise funds. So there should be complementary skill sets ideally. And that's when the partnership will really work, right? So I never had skill sets to raise money. He did. And therefore it worked very well for us. Launch and let everyone know that you made something. That's the next step, right? So PR is unfortunately in today's world is most important, and especially with Facebook, digital media, social media, it can be done at a fairly low cost, but you need to get your message out there. Unless people know about you, you're going to be irrelevant, right? So the only way to get your product or service into the market, and it can be done at a much lower cost today, is with a proper launch, a launch event, PR, putting it out in the news and putting it out into social media. Right? Then figuring out from your users, whoever is using your product or service, are they actually benefiting from it, and will they come back and repeat the purchase? If they bought it once, your service or your product, will they repeat it? So let's go back to the idea of last mile distribution of a Zomato order from Centurion University main gate to hostel, right? So the guy gave you 5 rupees for an order once. Now will he give it to you again, right? Will he give it to you a third time? Will he refer you to other people? That's when you are in that space of scaling. Can I go from that 3-4 users to 1,000 users? And only if you have repeat purchase and then you have references, that's when you'll be able to build a solid business around it, right? And then get onto the growth journey. If it's not happening, then you need to iterate again. So the example they've given here is Airbnb, which had to iterate thrice before it became successful. And Airbnb is a business which people were laughing off, and it's now literally the largest hotel chain because it's got the largest number of rooms in the world, right? Oyo is a close second. In fact, Oyo is closer to home, and it's a person from Odisha, from Raigada, who set up Oyo. Also a fantastic success story. Also very badly hit during COVID, but now they're back again and growing again. And then keep growing, because it's only when you hit a good critical mass of users, that's when you'll be able to get your next round of funding, a Series A, a Series B, and so on, right? And then that's a success. So how does this journey compare in our journey? Like, where do we stand in all of this? So we started in 2006 with long-term skill development, and we successfully scaled. We tried out short-term courses, and then we came up with many work integrated programs. I'm not going to get into details here, but in 2020, we found that COVID had hit us badly and we had to pivot. So we had to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer and redesign some of our products and make them technology enabled. And therefore we launched a new company called Learn, which is now also doing well, right? It's got as much of a turnover as Gramtarang has. I'm going to skip this slide for now. This is an interesting startup journey curve that I found on the internet, right? So the same journey we talked about, initial enthusiasm, lots of ideas, and then reality check. And then when you launch your product and service, whether it gets traction, doesn't get traction, how you go about executing will determine whether you fall down and you crash or whether you slowly come up. But at this stage is where you actually need the networks and funding to grow and scale, and then ultimately get to sustainability and become a successful SME. Now, I talked about legal structures, and that's a homework that I've given all of you, and why it's important for you to know that there are various options for legal structures in India, right? starting from a sole proprietorship to a partnership to a limited liability company to a trust, a not-for-profit company. The limited liability company has various categories, right? So you can choose to be any one of these. It depends on what kind of company that you want to build, what is your thought, your idea, where you see your end state, right? Or what you call in the startup language exits. What is your exit, right? Do you want this company to be a public listed company like Flipkart is, or do you want it to be just bought off by Byju's, like many companies dream to be, many edtech years. So it depends on what your vision and mission is. You can choose the right legal structure so that it is your purpose. Each one has pros and cons, right? So these are the 4 broad entities that you could choose to set up: private company, a public company, a one-person company, or a limited liability partnership. And I'm not going to talk through it in detail, but this is how they compare in terms of how many members, directors, how many partners, what is the minimum contribution that people need to put in, and what is the maximum contribution that they can put in, the equity that you put in, money that you put in. And there are advantages of each of them, right? So each of the companies has certain advantages, has certain disadvantages. Generally, the best way to start up is either if you're starting on your own as a one-person company. If it's 2 people, it's a limited liability partnership. But if you're planning to scale up and trying to raise money and go through Series A, Series B rounds, and you're going to have a group of people and you're going to have stock options for other employees, then a private limited company is probably the best option to go for, right? And there are many advantages of unlike public company, obviously, is when you get listed on the stock exchange, right? So that comes much. Of course, things are changing. There are many startups which are going public at an early stage, but by and large, most of the startups will come in category, the first category, or maybe the 3rd or 4th category. This is a comparison. I'm not going to go through it in detail. Happy to share the presentation so you can go through it at your leisure. But the comparison of a limited liability partnership and a company. It's important to understand that because these are the things that you need to consider when you're doing a startup, right? Where will be the location of the business? Where are the founders and promoters? How to best get to the market? Looking at these 4 things, you will go ahead and decide whether you want to set up a private limited company or a or a LLP. And that's exactly what an incubator will help you do. And we have an incubator in our Bhubaneswar campus. We also have people in each of our campuses, and they can help guide you there. The process of incorporation itself is fairly easy now. It's not so difficult. It takes time still, right? But because of all the ease of doing business, all of that that's going on, obtaining a director identification number and a digital certificate, putting in a proposed name so that it doesn't clash with an existing name. You have to draft your memorandum of association and articles of association, formally incorporate it and register it as a, or if it's an LLP, then there has to be an agreement signed, right? That's typically the process that is followed. There are various incentives available for startups, right? And what are the criteria for the startup to avail these incentives? I've already talked about it, so I'm not going to repeat this slide. But what are the incentives available? There is exemption available for tax, right? So this is a big thing. In the early days, even if you do make a profit, you won't have to pay tax on it. If you're not making a profit, anyway, you don't have to pay tax on it. But if you are, then you have a tax exemption. There are IPR benefits, which is intellectual property benefits, right? So this gives you a fast track examination of your patent applications. This is important, especially if you're coming up with the new technology-based solution. And this reduces your cost in filing patents. There's a deduction in profits and gains from startups. This is a technical matter, but always get one chartered accountant on board, somebody who's responsive, who doesn't blow you off, whom you can call up and speak to at any point of time. Very important to have one lawyer and one chartered accountant at hand at any point of time, because you'll keep coming across these kind of hurdles as you grow. Startups can apply for government tender, prior experience, turnover criteria. So for example, transformers, we found it, there's a lot of criteria that come in for transformers, turnover criteria, but startups are exempt from these criteria. And there is a government fund that has been set up to provide funds to startups as venture capital, right? So the government is also giving guarantee to the lenders to encourage lending. And there are self-certifications under the laws which allows you to easily, well, not circumvent, but easily comply with the labor and environment laws, right? Plus, it's also much easier to close a startup than a regular company. So you can closing a startup or closing a business is also a very important part of how to ease of doing business. For example, if you started a company with somebody, it didn't work out, you had a fight, you want to close the company and start a new one because that person is not willing to maybe sell his shares or whatever, then you can go for a closure process. A little bit about the intellectual property rights. This is very important for us to understand because in a startup, you don't have anything other than intellectual property. We are not setting up a massive factory, which has 50 crores of equipment and trying to sell some products. Generally, the startups which students would work on in a college setup, like Mark Zuckerberg did with Facebook, would be a tech-based solution or a product or a service where it's the IP right, the intellectual property rights, which are more important than the assets, or it's not very balance sheet heavy, right? So it's important to understand what the IP rights are, whether it's trademarks, patents, copyrights, trade secrets, industrial design. These will be your differentiator, and this is what will give you your value. So you have to protect this and file a trademark, get a patent when you can, because that is where your future valuation will come from. And these are the mistakes many of the startups make. They don't focus on this and just go ahead with implementation. Of course, it doesn't mean that before you even do a prototype, you work on patents, right? You first need to get the product right and find the product market fit. Then only would you go for all of these things. And mistakes to avoid, right? Choosing the wrong structure, not making the deal clear with co-founders. I've talked about this. This is a very, very important part of it. Having non-disclosure agreements when you're discussing it with anybody, because somebody who is potentially funding you will take your idea and give it to somebody else. You don't want that to happen, right? Documenting with employees, be very, very strong on documentation. Don't be casual about it. Don't do everything just on verbal agreements. Have written agreements, right? Because that's where all the future problems come from, right? IP, we talked about. Making sure that you have a privacy policy and terms of use agreement for your website, getting all the licenses, permits, complying with laws, with taxes. Make sure that you have the right supporting ecosystem in place to comply with all of these. Having a founders agreement, very, very important. Finally, funding. How do you raise money for a startup? There are three broad sources of money: debt, which is a loan; equity, which is money that you put in or you get an investor to put in; and debentures, which is somewhere between the two, more like debt. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the way to source this money, the first source can always be friends and family. That's what we did with our new startup in lockdown. We got a close friend of ours to give us 2 crores to set up our new edtech startup company, and then bank loans. Then you have the angel investor community. Angel investor is somebody who invests at an early stage startup where it's only an idea or a thought, and you don't have a robust big product and you don't have a revenue stream yet. It's still in the early stages. So that is where you have the early stage startups, seed funding when you're at an early stage. When your business has successfully, just started generating revenue streams, it has spent a year or two of doing that. That's when you get into the next round of funding, which is called Series A, Series B, and Series C, right? And that's when you get into that terminology, when venture capitalists will come in. Another alternative way of raising money is through crowdsourcing. So you could do friends and family funding, your friends put in money, or you could just put up on Facebook, or many of these platforms exist, your idea, and you can crowdsource it. If people in the world in general like your idea, it's something like an informal IPO, right? So in IPO, you go public and you ask anybody to buy your shares from a stock exchange. Here you put your idea up, and if people like it, they'll give you small money for it, and all of that money comes together and you get the funds that you need, right? So there are all of these various options. With that, it's been more than, almost an hour, 15 minutes. So I'm going to stop. I'm also very thirsty. I've been talking a lot of gyan from the experience, but hopefully some of it was useful for you. I would really like to open it up for questions and answers. See, the next step is actually writing a business plan, right? And that itself is in my opinion, it should be a mandatory 4-credit course in any B school. Writing a business plan. I'm not sure if it is here or not. So maybe it is part of some other subject that is being taught. But writing a business plan, having a go-to-market strategy, figuring out how to price your product or service, figuring out org structure and team, having a strategy in place, both in terms of technology, in terms of marketing, in terms of finance, having right, the financial model, the forecast, planning, budgeting. All of these are very important aspects of of a startup, setting up a startup, and each of them will help you successfully build your company. So happy to take any questions. We'll open the floor.
So now the floor is open, and I have done the security settings accordingly. So I would like to request every participant over here to ask any questions if you have regarding the discussions what we have. You can unmute yourself and you can ask the question. Sir, before they ask, I had a question. So
sure.
When you started the definition of startup, it is being told and it is being followed by many people that startup means it should be a tech-based company, technology enabled, something should be technology enabled. And when you presented the first slide and later on with the government of India definitions, so that's completely different. So is it really startup should be a combination of some technology related products, some innovation, something like that?
No, that's a very, very, very good question and an important question. Definitely, it's not a hygiene factor. It's not absolutely needed for it to have a technology based, but that's the exciting space today. That's where the funds are coming, right? Because why is technology important? Because people think that the only way to scale is using technology, right? When you build a platform, you aggregate users or demand, aggregate things, and people can then, without you having to travel and go around selling your product or service, you can do it online. So it can be successfully scaled more easily. So that's why a lot of attention and hype is there around the tech space. I believe that we should not get swayed by this obsession for technology. I feel that the real startup ideas are around you, right? They are in your community, in your city, where you're living, in your village, and they are centered around very simple things, right? Like products and services that you consume on a daily basis, right? You think that something as simple as good quality cheese or dahi, is something which, or even a rasagulla for that matter, is something which is already done by somebody else. You'll be surprised how successful, if you do a really good quality rasagulla in some part of the country and build a business around it, you can be really successful as well, right? So we have to think beyond technology. We have to think about identifying the gap in that context where you are, where people are feeling that something is missing. Do not get obsessed by this world, the tech world today. Everyone only thinks about apps and just doing something which is 99% of the startups are failing today. Everyone is doing this fancy app thing. 99% of them are failing, right? So let's not get swayed by that. Let's look at real products and services, because our country does not have enough of that. And especially last mile availability of products and services is a major issue in our country, right? Because our country is far and wide. What you have available at the drop of a hat in, let's say, a Delhi or a Bangalore or a Bombay is not available in a Bhubaneswar. So these are all entrepreneurial opportunities.
Yeah, that remind me, this Pahad or Rasagulla, I think Bhubaneswar people can very well relate. Yes, that's a famous one, and we are about to get GI, but anyways, that's the different story. But yes, that's very well successful.
No, it's important you said that. So I got a really good idea for a startup from the former Chief Secretary of Orissa. He was, when we met him, Professor Mishra and I met him in Delhi. He was on a posting there in the Ministry of Home Affairs, and I was telling him about the work that we're doing in skilling and how we are training people for Pizza Hut and Cafe Coffee Day. So he says, you know what you need in Orissa? What I miss the most in Delhi from Orissa is pitha. And one of my favorite things is pitha. He says, why don't you have a Pitha Hut? Why is it always a Pizza Hut? A Pitha Hut will be healthier, right? And people will love it. So these are the the ideas which can really do well.
True. And here, when you talk about rasgulla, I'm not having that sweet tooth, but yes, I had a love for chenna podo, but that is hardly we found it at Vijayanagaram. So whenever I go back to my native Barampur, I make sure that I would have a small bite so that I can, recall the taste for the rest of few months I would be at Vijayanagaram. So yes, these are very important. Sir, before they ask, any questions we have from the audience, you can please unmute and ask. Sir, the time they are forming. So there is a few exercises you have given, like to come up with few examples of different formats of company that you mentioned about the formats, how it is to be started and all. Of course, they need to come with the examples and all. You also talked about these definitions, debt, equity, and debentures. And you talked about a bit of fundraising. So you have given the exercise for this angel investment, seed funding, Series A, Series B, and Series C. Can you just talk about a bit on that?
Yeah, so I know I went through it very quickly because the first half of the presentation was so long. I think that itself requires a full-fledged session. Probably request for the help of one of the finance professors at the School of Management to help out there. Or maybe even our director, Professor Soumit Ukil, who's a senior of mine from XIMB. I think we could take a joint session sometime in the future. But in a nutshell, there are two sources of money when you're starting a company. One is debt and one is equity. Debt is a loan which you typically take from a bank, and equity is the money that you put in yourself, or you get an investor to put in, for which you give them shares of the company, right? So that's in essence the two sources of funds. Now there's a lot of deep thinking and strategy of what kind of money should be used for what purpose, because it depends on how you plan to use the money, right? Are you going to use this money only to build up a stock of rasagullas and set up a store, or are you going to use this money to buy a nice fancy machine which makes rasagullas? So depending on how you plan to use the money, you will either choose debt or equity. So like I said, that itself is a very it's a huge topic. We can plan a future session on that. Himanshu has raised his hand. So Himanshu, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Sir, myself Himanshu Shekhar Naik. I am a student from MBA department first year, sir. Sir, I have some ideas for startup, creating some zero waste products, sir, selling sustainable products which are reusable bags and bamboo toothbrushes, and some sustainable focused consumers only. So, sir, what's the strategy should I implement so that it will be like success for me as well as for my partners and co-workers?
So I think first of all, that's a really good area to work in personally, right? Because it's becoming quite a rage, right? There's a lot of interest and demand from industry, from people in general, for sustainable products, right? Especially the international market. If you go to an Australia or the US, there's a huge premium being paid for that, and that is a strategy that even we are thinking of adopting at Gramtarang. We have a small lab here called the Waste to Wealth Lab, where we are making handmade paper and we're making some products out of that. So how do you market it, and what kind of market you tend to focus on? We'll need to think a little bit more deeply about that, right? Would you like to have a website or a portal where you actually try to get people to come in and buy your products online? How would you like to take your products to the market? What will be your distribution strategy? So you need to have both a production strategy, that how will you make these products? Where will you make them? Who will make them for you? How do you make sure that these products are meet certain quality norms? So you need to get your production strategy right, especially if you're going to scale up. But then also we need to parallelly build a go-to-market strategy. So these two need to come together. And like that startup journey slide that I showed, the first thing is to get some prototypes and get them out there and get some market feedback, right? If the quality of the products are right, the pricing is right or not, what is the feedback from the customer? So I would personally start by doing a small exhibition, in my own campus, right, on one of the days, or taking a small stall somewhere, setting it up. If it were Bhubaneswar campus, Centurion Coffee Connect is a great place to get some products out there. So product placement where there is always already a footfall, right? Wherever there is a footfall of people, we can put some products out there and just test out the market and get feedback from them. And then focus on 4 or 5, bring your focus down to 4 or 5 products which you think will do well, which will sell well. Then work backwards and build a production strategy for that. How will you make these products on a larger scale in a cost efficient manner, maintaining the quality so that the pricing is right, and then build your go-to-market strategy. So it requires, and it will be iterative. Yeah, so you have to keep trying something, go back to the drawing board. That's how I would go about it.
Thank you, sir, so much. So another like I have a new like this is the fresh ideas which I am just like acquiring while studying MBA course in our college, sir. So I'm like really very much inspired the way of teaching and the way of experience they are giving to us, and it's very helpful for our future as well as for our career also, sir. So, sir, by like studying in like pursuing gradually like in MBA, so I have another like idea of offering virtual team building and creating educational content also, sir. As I was also in like a previous employer of GTET, sir. So after that, I again started to upgrading my skill by studying in MBA department. Okay. So, sir, will this be helpful for me to grow up my skills and like to build a good and startup at the end of the MBA?
I think it's a great space to be in. It's a very tough market because you have all the big names like Upgrad and Unacademy, which are doing a lot of the online courses. But there is something that we are trying to do at Centurion University itself. So let's definitely talk about that. When I told you that I have a selfish reason also for having this session, I just wanted to reach out to the students and offer them our platform, right? So we have an edtech company, which is a startup as well, which is trying to do stuff in this domain. We'll be happy to have you come sit down with the team. I have a product development team. We're looking at ideas and let's look at these opportunities. So very happy. Let's connect offline on this. We'll talk about it.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Dr. Girish from Kerala Community Campus. Sir, I have one idea to develop a product. How do I know that it's a unique one? How can I go for IPR?
So, okay, that's well, I suppose I have a lawyer here who can help you out. So we can do that. That's what we've done as well, right? Okay. So I think you just go to the department, file it in. They will take some time to respond to see whether or not it is unique, and they'll let you know. So I think we outsource it to a consultant. Basically, the consultant does it for us. It's not very expensive also, because I think, in fact, the university will be doing much more of that, because in our various research units, we are filing so many patents. There may be somebody in the university itself who will be able to give you a better answer than mine, frankly.
Okay, thank you.
I saw Pinku Deka has raised your hand. Pinku Deka, what is your question? Can you come up and ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I do have a question for sir, and that is, for example, how can you do marketing for a product which the customers are not familiar with? Like, for example, if we have to sell pizza, for example, in a native place in India, and where people are not familiar with pizza, and how can you sell pizzas there? Is there any way? I mean, is there any marketing strategy that we have to? It's like more about marketing, so I want to learn it from sir if possible.
Yeah, I think, I mean,
and that is related to my work only. So, but my question would be like that only.
Right, so, right. No, I think, see, it's a good question, right? How do you decide whether this will work in this market or not? But it's very contextual, right? It all depends on whether it is to the tastes and to the likes and preferences of the people there, which is why all these big brands, right, whether it's McDonald's or Domino's or Pizza Hut, they customize their offerings so much in India. But it's funny you mentioned this, because I was just thinking, I in the morning, I go for a run in the mornings, and I went to Jatni, right? I crossed Jatni town and I reached about the nicer, and I came back and I was looking at how the retail space has just boomed in a small town like Jatni. Parlakamundi will also be similar, right? Now, there's a huge opportunity there because the big brands like Domino's and Pizza Hut are not going to come to a place like Jatni. They'll just come to Bhubaneswar and they won't come beyond. People from Jatni will not travel all the way to Bhubaneswar just to have pizza. So there's a big gap there, and that big gap okay, Domino's is a brand, but Domino's will not be willing to come and set up a small store, right? So there's an opportunity to set up your own little place and pilot it. The only way to do it is pilot and test market, test. So you test the market, do on a festival, have maybe during Bihu in Assam, have a small stall, have pizzas out there, offer it to the people, get their feedback. Market research companies specialize in this, but obviously as a small startup, you can't afford all the market research companies. But the only way to do it is to test the market, right? Get their likes and dislikes. And then obviously you need to actually make sure that you have a store out there and you're able to service that need, because if they like it, they'll need to know where should they go to get their next pizza. So I think the opportunity is there. The only way to get a feel in a remote rural place is to test it.
I think Pinku, you got your answer. Yes. To this, I just wanted to add our student, VBA student, are recently opening up a coffee corner over here. And at Vijayanagaram, places like Vijayanagaram, I know one coffee cafe day is available that is on the highway when you're going to Visakhapatnam. That's too far. So if people wanted to really experience the coffee or cafe coffee day, where would they go when they don't have, the accessibilities and all? So the students have done it and they are testing it here with last 2 months. And you're talking about applied learning. Just yesterday, they were realizing that they are making sandwiches and all. So they discussed with someone who is ready to offer 15% discount on the bread they are purchasing. And initially, they were like paying more when they are, getting it through a local middleman. And he is not giving that 15% discount earlier, which he used to get. And he's charging 5% extra on every deliveries, on every packet. So this is what a learning student have done. Like yesterday, they've realized, and yes, this is very much accessible. Now, when these things would be developed, the nearby vicinity people, they can come and they can also experience cafe, coffee day and all. So this is how we can do. Do we have any other question? Any other question by faculties and students?
Sir, Pushkar here. One question, sir.
Yes.
Is every company is a startup, or the particular some companies can go for the startup?
Every company, if you start a new company, it is a startup for 7 years, right? Whatever legal entity you choose to be, it's a startup for the first 7 years. So
yeah, after startup, I have studied about it becomes a unicorn after 100 crores of turnover. So
one unicorn is 1 billion valuation, not turnover. So unicorn is 1 billion valuation. There's a big difference between valuation and turnover. Turnover is the revenue you get. Valuation is what the investors think that you're worth, right? And there's a huge gap in that. That is why companies like Zomato and all have huge valuations, but they're not profitable. They may have a good revenue also. They may have a turnover, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're profitable. So big gap in that.
Okay.
Hope Pushkarji, you have got your query solved. Any other query do we have from the students and from the faculties? Okay. So, sir, I would like to take this session as an end over here. And before that, I just wanted to share a few of my observations during the entire session. You started with your journey from Cubicle to the real rural world, which is 70% of like Indian population who stays at rural areas, and roughly we can say 2/3 of the person we are in rural India only. And yes, you have learned from the top-notch B school, and this theory and concepts, what everyone is learned from these schools, when we are applying that is completely a different. So we have to modify as for the knowledge we have gained during this. We just, talked about the definition of startup and few of other queries also related to startup. So we honestly from corporate where we have at least when fixed salary is coming, even though we have a lot of odds and a lot of challenges, but yeah, that makes life secure. You said that initial days you had a fiat palio, and now when you are having as a successful startup, you may have more, but I know many startup those who invest money from their own pocket, and they don't have that after a period of struggle. So yeah, the monk who first sold the Ferrari, that actually lot of a good motivation book, and that really catched the eye. But it the I know I was very much attracted when you reversed it, the monk or the person who didn't sold his Ferrari. So this is one observation of mine. You also talked about the power of choice. So every day, everyone who is part of your and everyone, we are making a lot of choices. And you show us a video where the girl Bhanupriya, who made a choice, and now from Cochinda she's at Bangalore. And likewise, the other case study you have shown, Poonam Kumari, probably she is also at a very better place. The second example you have shown of yours, our Vice President, Professor B.N. Rao sir, President, Professor Dr. Muktikanta Mishra sir, when people like you are graduated from topmost institutes and who have a very secure life. But again, when you decided to come back and do something for the society, there is a challenge, and that is the choice you people have opted, and of course that makes a difference. There is a slide where you shown that India is only having 5% of vocational skill, and where you are highlighting China has having, I think, 5 lakh vocational score, where India is having 30,000. I was looking at South Korea, and when we talk about South Korea, this is was one of the top country where we have lot of business opportunities, and it is the strongest business economies in the world, and who attract more of FDI. So that probably because of this vocational training program that is available. You talked about action learning program, and with the example of transformer, how you got that transformer to repair, and initially now that particular learning is generating 5 to 6 crore revenue every time. So that is a huge impact, and of course everyone present here would relate to that. Of course, we are talking about evaluations, how Centurion University and how Gramtarang evaluated from one place to other, and you also shared your own journey in the way like you started, how 10 lakh application of yours is being rejected by a bank. Now you are turning over more than 100 crore as a GTET entity. So how to start up a process, how to start a startup, you've just shown that process. In fact, that is also very much interesting and relevant, I think, where the student they can find is the key skill, that is networking, and they really need to learn how to get networking. As you said, this bonds debenture is a different topic. How to build network, that also is a very difficult, different and important topic for the students to learn. So this is what my takeaway. You talked about equity, that which is what is the co-founder or the person who is having this equity percentage, what value they are bringing into the table. That is a very crucial decision for a startup to select the co-founders and all. And also you gave, many people say failure become the pillar of success. And you gave an example of Airbnb, which is a homestay model. So yes, they built 3 times, they failed 3 times, and now Airbnb is a name. So my message is to the students and participants over here is not to give up when they got failed, but yes, obviously learn something from the previous failure. So this is what my learning, and I'm sure the student, the participant, even though they are silent, they might have learned something. And as I mentioned already, this session is recorded. I would share this with all the stakeholders of Centurion. Obviously, the learning could be used, and the impact is itself is used. So I thank Abhinav sir for coming, for sharing. As you said, today was a very important day for you, but still then, as you are committed, so I would recommend again, this commitment is one of the important skills what everyone should learn and should apply in our life, the value of our word, and that build more trust. So thank you, sir, for being here, for sharing your journey, for bringing something new to our student and for every participant. So thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, and we would certainly connect with you again.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you all.